All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for being here bright and early on this Thursday morning for our compliance fundamentals. If My name is Maylee Cook. We could go to our next slide. I am the Training and Outreach Specialist here at WECC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. Our next slide. Let me begin with the antitrust policy. All WECC meetings are conducted in accordance with the WECC antitrust policy and the NERC antitrust compliance guidelines. All participants must comply with the policy and guidelines. This meeting is public. Confidential or proprietary information should not be discussed in open session. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted publicly. By participating, you give your consent for your name, voice, image, and likeness to be included in that recording. WECC strives to ensure the information presented today is accurate and reflects the views of WECC. However, all interpretations and positions are subject to change. If you have any questions, please contact WECC's legal counsel. We would love to have you participate in this webinar by asking questions. Feel free to send those to WECC meetings through the chat feature in WebEx. You can also use the raise hand and we can call on you. Next slide. We will be using Slido for this webinar today. We would like to get you started and get you into the Slido. So go ahead and scan that QR code and let us know what your favorite Thanksgiving dish is, and we'll get you all signed in and practiced. You also can join by using just your web browser, typing slido.com, using that hash code #WECC, and then you are able to participate that way as well. So we'll give this just a moment for people to figure out how to sign on and get in there. I'm excited to, ooh, look at all these mashed potatoes. That's a personal favorite of mine as well. Definitely the turkey. Love it. Oh, mac and cheese. That is something that's new to my Thanksgiving table. I'm totally down for it. All right. Stuffing is winning. Oh, goodness. Over my mashed potatoes. All right. I'll give this just a couple more minutes so you can get your feel for the Slido. Ooh, jalapeno cranberry sauce. That would be a favorite at my family. They would love that. Leftovers. Interesting. We've got some excellent ideas here. If you were needing some help with your Thanksgiving menu, there are definitely some ideas here. All right. We're going to go ahead and move on. You will see this Slido QR code each time we have one. So if you didn't quite figure it out, we'll have another chance to do so. But let's go ahead on to our next slide. It is my pleasure to welcome Steve Noess, Vice President of Reliability and Security Oversight, for our opening remarks.
Hey, thanks, Maylee. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this morning. I'm excited to kick this off briefly here before we get to the real content. But first, I think I've got on my list jalapeno cranberry sauce to Google after this. That sounds great. I'm going to try to find that for this year's Thanksgiving. Thanks for that suggestion for whoever provided it. But we're excited today to pilot, I think, what we hope is the first of a recurring series of outreach and discussions targeted in particular to what we categorize as our lower inherent risk entities. We, since 2007, have been working to enforce, monitor, and register entities related to the mandatory enforceable reliability standards. And of course, those are probably something that are part of what you have to deal with as part of your roles at the companies that you represent. I think naturally, we gravitated a lot of our efforts toward what we consider to be kind of the most expansive, highest risk types of entities, the balancing authorities, the transmission operators, the reliability coordinators, and that's where a lot of our resources were understandably, I think, focused for those years. But as the grid has continued to transform, we have more and more registrants every day. We have a broad spectrum of entities. Just a couple years ago, we only had 300 and some entities registered in the Western Interconnection for WECC reliability standards. And as of this quarter, I think it's 434 entities that are registered in the U.S. jurisdiction. There's 30 some in the Canadian provinces of British Columbia and Alberta, and we have some entities in Mexico, of course, too. But that's continuing to grow. Some of you have been part of this construct since the beginning in 2007. We're aware of that. Some of you may be relatively new, and we know that more and more are going to be joining us every month, really. And so we've seen a need to be more holistic in our approach to having outreach and engaging with entities that are responsible for complying with mandatory and enforceable reliability standards. And we've done that in a couple of ways. First, last year we reorganized our monitoring efforts into 4 main teams. And so we've got a physical security team, and then we've got a team each focused on our lower, our medium, and our higher inherent risk type of entities. And we're trying to provide some consistency in terms of who you'll interact with and how you'll interact with them. But also we want to tailor how we interact with specific types of constituents of our programs. And so today you're going to hear a lot of emphasis from Stacia, Karen's team, and hopefully you'll get to put a face to a name, and we'll start to see some consistency in the types of people that you interact with. But we're committed to increasing the engagement across the spectrum to be more holistic in the way that we engage with entities. And I think what you'll see as a result of that is a lot more activity from WECC across that spectrum of 430 some entities and plus 30 plus in Canada as we go forward. But that doesn't mean more audits. It's not like that's not our approach. We care as you care about your success in supporting reliability and security. And so for the foreseeable future, we see a partnership opportunity. We want to put everybody in the best position to do as well as they can, and we share your commitment to that work. And so, like I said, we see this as the first of what we hope is a recurring set of interactions. We hope you give us some feedback. Let us know what you enjoyed, what we can enhance, and really just enjoy today's presentation and ask a lot of questions. So thanks for being here, really. And with that, let me pass it on to Stacia to carry on with the main part of the program.
Thank you so much, Steve. I've been having a few issues with my mic, so if you cannot hear me, please let me know. My name is Stacia Karen, and I am a manager of Entity Monitoring here at WECC. My team's focus is on low inherent risk entities. So like Steve mentioned, we have over 400 entities here in the US that we are responsible for, and the bulk of those entities fall under the low inherent risk entity umbrella. So me and my team have a lot of entities to monitor. And like Steve said, one of the ways we want to continue to do that is to provide outreach based on the risks that we are seeing. So we have some presentations for you. I'm just going to briefly go over the methods that WECC uses to monitor compliance, just to give you a quick overview. So next slide, please. WECC is one of 6 regional entities across North America that make up the ERO enterprise. Each regional entity, including WECC, is required to maintain and implement a program for risk-based monitoring for registered entities within its footprint. The most common compliance monitoring methods WECC uses are listed here, which are compliance audits, spot checks, and self-certification. In the next few slides, I'm going to touch on each of these monitoring methods and share a little bit about their timeline. So next slide, please. Compliance audits. WECC's US compliance audits have evolved from an actively monitored list in years past to risk-based monitoring, although entities in Canada still use an actively monitored list. So for those who are joining us from Canada, an actively monitored list is a yearly set of reliability standards that are selected based upon WECC-identified high-risk priorities for all entities being monitored in that year. That said, entities are obligated to comply with all reliability standards applicable to their functional registration at all times. Again, this is used in Canada, but not the US. So for those US audits, WECC does a risk-based monitoring. WECC determines the audit scope of each entity's audit based on targeted risk areas and audit objectives that are communicated to the entity. WECC is required by the NERC Rules of Procedure to conduct compliance audits of entities registered as balancing authority, reliability coordinator, or transmission operator at least every 3 years. An entity will be notified at least 270 days before the start of a planned compliance audit. Next slide, please. Spot checks are used in a variety of situations. The NERC Rules of Procedure specifically mentions that spot checks can be used to support an entity's self-certification, self-report, or periodic data submittal. It could also be used as a random check or in response to problems or events. Historically, WECC has not used spot checks as often compared to the other 2 monitoring methods. However, it is our intention to use this monitoring method more in the future as determined by our risk-based monitoring approach. Now, I've spoken with a few entities who have never had a spot check, but view it as the most nerve-wracking monitoring tool that WECC has, and it shouldn't be. It should not be a scary monitoring tool. It is simply just another monitoring tool that we use. An entity will be notified at least 20 days prior to the start of a spot check, although we do try to provide more notice in advance of a spot check if we are able to. So next slide, please. Okay, last but not least, self-certification. A self-certification can look different, but the foundation is the same. Essentially, WECC is asking the entity to attest if they are compliant, non-compliant to a reliability standard requirement, or if they do not own or is not applicable to the entity. Now, what may vary from self-certification to self-certification is what other information, if any, WECC requests from the entity during the self-certification process. For example, WECC recently sent out a batch of self-certifications to nearly a quarter of its registered entities that included internal controls questions that address cold weather preparedness and low impact cybersecurity risks. With any self-certification, an entity has 60 days from the notice of self-certification to respond and provide the requested information. WECC can follow up with more requests for information and even interview requests if necessary. And as I previously mentioned on the slide before, responses to self-certs might also be a driver for another monitoring method, such as a spot check, if warranted. So next slide. All of this information comes from the NERC Rules of Procedure. And in closing, WECC determines which monitoring methods to use based on the risk it is addressing. A spot check might be used to address a very focused risk, but so might a type of self-certification. It all depends on the circumstances of the specific risk and the specific entity. And so with that, I do have time to take 1 or 2 questions if there are any. If not, we can move on to CRC 5.